A new home is supposed to be a sanctuary, but tonight we'll hear 3 stories from people who discovered that promise of security was broken the moment they turned the key. They found themselves battling not just restless spirits, but the very real and dangerous human threats that were already inside. Story 1 by James Jr. Our first account comes from a young couple we'll call Sarah and Tom. They did everything right. They spent years saving, carefully planning, and dreaming of the day they could finally escape their cramped apartment and buy a place of their own. They found it in a charming 2-story house on a quiet, tree-lined street. It was older, built in the late 50s, and it had its quirks: a few creaky floorboards, a stubborn kitchen window, a faint, musty smell in the upstairs hall. But to them, these weren't flaws, they were character. It was a house with history, and they were excited to become a part of it. The first few weeks were perfect. They painted the living room a warm, inviting yellow. They spent a whole Saturday assembling a new bed, laughing while they argued over the confusing instructions. They even hosted a small housewarming party, filling the rooms with warmth and life. The house felt like theirs. The first incident was small, almost nothing. Sarah had left her favorite coffee mug on the kitchen counter, right next to the sink. When she came downstairs after a shower, it was sitting on the dining table. She stared at it, confused. She was certain she hadn't moved it. "Tom," she called out, "did you move my mug?" From the backyard where he was wrestling with a lawnmower, he yelled back, "No, haven't been inside." Sarah shrugged it off. She must have been more tired than she thought. It was a new space after all. A few days later, the sounds started. A faint scratching, seeming to come from inside the walls of their bedroom. "We have mice," Tom declared with a sigh, already adding "call an exterminator" to their to-do list. The sound was intermittent, mostly heard late at night when the house was silent. It was annoying, but it was explainable. Old houses have pests. But then the sound changed. One evening, Sarah was in the master bathroom getting ready for bed when Tom was downstairs watching TV. As she was brushing her teeth, she heard it. This wasn't the frantic scratching of a rodent. This was a low, guttural noise, a growl. It was deep, vibrating through the wall behind the sink. It lasted only a few seconds. Sarah froze, toothbrush in hand, her heart suddenly pounding. The sound was so bizarre, and it seemed to come from inside the very structure of the house. She leaned closer to the wall, listening. Silence. "Tom," she shouted, her voice trembling, "did you hear that?" He came to the bottom of the stairs. "Hear what, hon?" "That noise. It sounded like a dog growling, but it came from the wall." Tom came up and pressed his ear against the plaster. Nothing. He tapped it, solid. "Probably just the pipes," he said, trying to sound reassuring. "This old plumbing probably makes all sorts of weird noises. Don't worry about it." Sarah wanted to believe him. She really tried, but the sound hadn't been metallic or watery. It had felt organic, alive. The incidents began to escalate. A heavy cookbook flew off a kitchen shelf, landing on the floor with a loud bang while they were in the next room. They'd come home to find drawers slightly ajar and closet doors they knew they had shut now standing open. The warmth of the house was being replaced by a creeping unease. They started walking through their own home with a new caution, like they were guests who might disturb an unseen host. "This isn't just the house settling," Sarah whispered one night after they found a framed wedding photo lying face down on the mantelpiece. "Something is wrong here. I feel like we're not alone." Tom, the pragmatist, was still trying to find a logical explanation. He checked the foundation for drafts, he re-leveled shelves, but even his skepticism was starting to crumble. The growling had returned, and now he'd heard it himself, a low rumble from the hallway closet that stopped the moment he opened the door. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night in October. Tom was working late, and Sarah was home alone. A storm was rolling in, rattling the old window frames. She was trying to distract herself with a movie, curled up on the sofa with a blanket pulled up to her chin. That's when she heard it, the growl. This time, it was louder than ever, and it was unmistakably coming from their bedroom directly above her. Her blood ran cold. She muted the TV, her ears straining. The growl came again, longer this time, a deep, menacing vibration that she could almost feel through the floor. It was coming from their bedroom closet.
Her heart hammered. She grabbed her phone, her fingers fumbling as she dialed Tom. "Hello," he answered cheerfully. "It's happening again," she whispered, her voice choked with panic. "The growling, it's in the bedroom, it's so loud." "Okay, Sarah, stay calm," his tone instantly serious. "I'm leaving right now. I'll be home in 15 minutes. Lock the doors and stay on the phone with me." As she was talking to him, her eyes fixed on the top of the staircase, a new sound made her gasp. A soft creak. It was the sound of their bedroom door, which she knew she had closed, swinging open. "Sarah, what was that?" Tom's voice was sharp with worry. "The bedroom door just opened," she breathed. She sat completely still, listening. The house went silent again. Too silent. And then a new sound. Click, clack, click, clack. The sound of a light switch being flicked on and off rapidly. Suddenly, the entire house plunged into darkness. The power was out. "Sarah, the power's out!" she shrieked. "It's okay, it's the storm," he said, trying to keep her calm, but he could hear the panic in his own voice. "I'm 5 minutes away. Just stay where you are." In the pitch black, every sound was terrifying. The wind, the rain, her own heart. And then the sound that would be forever seared into her memory. The growl was back, and it wasn't upstairs anymore. It was right outside the living room door, a low, wet, guttural snarl. She held her breath. The doorknob, the brass doorknob on the living room door began to jiggle, slowly at first, then more violently rattling in its fixture. Something was trying to get in. Sarah screamed, a raw sound of pure terror, scrambling backwards off the sofa. At that exact moment, the front door of the house burst open. For a heart-stopping second, she thought it had broken in. But it was Tom, lit up by a flash of lightning. He saw her on the floor screaming as another flash lit up the living room doorway, showing the doorknob still shaking. They didn't stay to find out what it was. Tom grabbed her arm and they ran out of the house, into the rain, not even bothering to close the door. They spent the night in a hotel, soaked and traumatized. The next day, they returned with Sarah's father and a trusted contractor. The house was quiet. The power was back on. The living room door was still. It was as if nothing had happened. They hired paranormal investigators who registered abnormally high EMF fields and a significant cold spot around the master bedroom closet. They suggested a non-human spiritual entity. But Tom couldn't shake how physical it had all felt. He convinced the contractor to open up the wall in the back of that closet. The contractor cut a square out of the plasterboard and pulled it away. They all aimed their flashlights into the dark space behind it. It wasn't a ghost. The truth was somehow infinitely more horrifying. Behind the wall was a narrow, dusty crawl space that ran from the closet down into the basement, and inside this cramped space there were signs of life. A dirty blanket, a pile of candy wrappers and empty chip bags, a plastic bottle half filled with water. Someone had been living in their walls. The growling wasn't paranormal, it was the distorted sound of a person moving through the tight space. The moving objects, the flickering lights, the turning doorknob, it was a person who had been there the whole time, watching them, listening to them. They had been sharing their dream house with a predator from the very beginning. The police were called, but the person was never found. They had vanished, leaving behind only the chilling evidence of their presence. Sarah and Tom sold the house immediately at a huge loss. They couldn't spend another night there. Their story, though unverified, is a terrifying reminder that not all monsters are supernatural.
The idea of a stranger secretly living in your walls is terrifying. But sometimes the threat isn't hidden in the walls. It's been left behind by the people who were there before. This next account comes from a family who learned that the hard way. The Clark family, David, Laura, and their kids, 8-year-old Emily and 6-year-old Josh, had found their perfect home. It was a big house on a quiet cul-de-sac with a fenced-in yard and a finished basement that David already saw as his future man cave. The sellers were an elderly couple, the Hendersons. They seemed sweet, if a little frail, and said they were downsizing to be closer to their grandkids. They were incredibly eager to sell, accepting the Clarks' first offer without negotiation. During the final walkthrough, Laura pointed to a heavy-duty steel door in a corner of the basement. "What's in there?" she asked Mrs. Henderson. The old woman waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, that's just the old storm room. We lost the key years ago. It's just filled with my husband's old junk." Her eyes flickered away for just a second, a brief moment of evasiveness that Laura noticed but quickly dismissed. They moved in on a bright Saturday in June, but as they settled in, they began to notice unsettling oddities. It began with noises from the basement. Late at night, they'd hear faint thumps, a muffled cough, the sound of something being dragged lightly across the concrete. Then food began to disappear from the pantry, a box of crackers, a few cans of soup. It was so minor that Laura initially blamed her own memory. David noticed their second electricity bill was about 15% higher than it should be. It was another anomaly he couldn't explain. The feeling of being watched started soon after. Laura would be doing laundry in the basement, and a sudden chill would run down her spine, the distinct prickling sensation that a pair of eyes were on her. She'd whip her head around, but she was always alone. The only thing staring back was the cold gray steel of the locked storm room door. The most disturbing development came from their son, Josh. One evening at dinner, he was chattering away about his day. "And then the man in the wall told me he was hungry," he said casually. Laura and David exchanged a look. "What man in the wall, sweetie?" Laura asked gently. "The man in the basement," Josh said, as if it were obvious. "He whispers to me sometimes." They chalked it up to an imaginary friend, a common thing for a kid adjusting to a new house. Still, it left them both deeply unsettled. The situation came to a head on a sweltering afternoon in August. The AC was blasting when, with a loud click, half the power in the house went out. David went to the basement to check the breaker box. The breaker labeled basement/misc kept tripping. Frustrated and sweating, his eyes fell on the locked storm room door. He had a hunch there was a wiring fault inside. "That's it," he muttered. "I'm getting in there." He grabbed a heavy crowbar and a sledgehammer. "Laura," he called up the stairs, "I'm going to open up this old storm room." He wedged the crowbar into the seam and slammed the sledgehammer against the door. The sound echoed through the house. Finally, with a loud crack, the lock gave way and the heavy door swung inward into darkness. A wave of cool, stale air washed over him, smelling of dust, sweat, and something clinical. He turned on his flashlight and pointed the beam into the blackness. It wasn't junk. In the far corner of the small concrete room sat a neatly made cot. Next to it was a humming mini-fridge and a chemical toilet. It was a makeshift bedroom, and he was not alone. Cowering in the corner, shielding his eyes from the light, was a man. He was shockingly thin and pale, with long matted hair and a scraggly beard. He was trembling, staring at David with wide, terrified eyes. David stumbled backward, heart seizing. He raised the sledgehammer. "Who the hell are you?" he yelled. The man didn't speak. He just curled into a tighter ball. And then David understood. His mind flashed the sweet, frail Hendersons, their eagerness to sell, their evasiveness about this room, their hurried move. They had mentioned an adult son who was living and working abroad. This wasn't a squatter. This was their son. They hadn't taken him with them. They had left him behind, a gift for the new owners. They had sealed him in the basement and simply walked away. Laura and the kids were at the top of the stairs. "David, what is it?" "Laura," David said, his voice a strained, horrified whisper. "Call 911 now." The story that unfolded was more tragic than they could have imagined. The man was indeed the Henderson's son. He suffered from severe agoraphobia and other untreated mental health issues and hadn't left the house in a decade. His parents, unable to cope, had concealed him from the world. When they decided to move, they made the unthinkable decision to abandon him. The man was taken into the care of Adult Protective Services. He was nonviolent. The monster wasn't him, but the situation he'd been forced into. The Clark family was devastated.
Josh's imaginary friend had been a very real, desperate man whispering through the vents. The thought of their children playing just a few feet from a hidden, captive person made them sick. They couldn't stay. They put the house back on the market, forced to disclose the grisly discovery. Their dream was shattered by the secrets the previous owners chose to lock away. The account was submitted as a true experience, a chilling story that exists outside of any public record. It's stories like these that make you question what really goes on behind closed doors. If you've had an experience you can't explain, I'd be interested to read about it in the comments. Now for our final story, we move from a threat hidden within a home to one that arrives with brutal, terrifying force.
Our final account comes from a couple named Mark and Jessica. They were just starting out and decided to rent a newly renovated duplex. Their unit was on the right. The one on the left was identical but vacant. The owner is just finishing up some paperwork, the landlord explained. You'll have neighbors soon enough. For the first few weeks, the silence from the other side of the wall was a welcome peace. The first sign that something was wrong was subtle. After a heavy rain, Mark was taking out the trash when he noticed a set of distinct, large boot prints in the muddy flower bed right below the vacant unit's front window. It looked like someone had been standing there, peering inside. He tried to rationalize it, maybe the landlord or a contractor, but it felt strange. A week later, Jessica was coming home late. As she pulled into the driveway, she glanced at the vacant unit and her heart skipped a beat. A light was on. A yellow glow flickered in the living room window for a split second, then vanished. She sat in her car for 5 minutes, eyes glued to the window, but it didn't happen again. The landlord was adamant. Impossible, he said. No one has keys but me. It must have been a reflection from a passing car. Jessica didn't believe it. She began to feel constantly watched, especially from the dark windows of the empty unit next door. The night Mark returned from a business trip, they were watching a movie. Just after 11 p.m., an earth-shattering bang ripped through the house as their front door was kicked off its hinges. Before they could react, 3 figures in dark tactical gear and ski masks stormed in, pinning them in the beams of weapon-mounted flashlights. "Get on the floor, now," a voice barked. Terrified, they did. One intruder kept a weapon on them, while the other 2 tore their apartment apart with brutal efficiency. "Where is it?" one of them kept demanding. "We know it's here." "We don't know what you're talking about," Mark yelled, his face pressed to the carpet. "We just moved in." The search lasted less than 5 minutes. The intruders seemed to realize their mistake. "Wrong unit," one of them grunted, and then they were gone. Mark and Jessica were left trembling in the wreckage. The police came but found nothing. No witnesses, no vehicle. They theorized it was a case of mistaken identity. The couple was too terrified to stay. They broke the lease and went to live with Jessica's parents. A week later, just after 2 a.m., Jessica's phone rang. It was a neighbor. "Jessica, your house! It's on fire!" They raced over to see fire trucks and police cars painting the night sky red. Their duplex was engulfed in smoke, but the flames weren't coming from their unit. The fire was entirely contained to the vacant side, a raging inferno right next door to where they had been living. They stood across the street in shock. After the fire was out, one of the investigators approached them, looking unsettled. "This is going to sound odd, but one of my men reported something unusual. When they first made entry into the burning unit, he swears he saw something." "What did they see?" Mark asked. The investigator hesitated. "He says he saw the figure of a person standing completely still, right in the middle of the room, in the heart of the fire." Mark and Jessica stared, confused. "A person? Did you get them out?" "That's the thing," the investigator said, lowering his voice. "He said the figure was engulfed in flames, literally on fire, but it wasn't burning or screaming or moving. It was just standing there. He turned to grab a hose, and when he looked back a second later, it was gone."
"We've done a full search," the investigator continued. "The fire has been ruled an arson, but we found no body, no remains, no evidence anyone was physically inside when the fire started, not a trace." Mark and Jessica never went back. They were left with terrifying, unanswerable questions. Who were the men in tactical gear? What were they looking for? Was it a person they were after, or was it the fiery, unburning figure the firefighter saw? Had they been living next door not to an empty house, but to something ancient and inexplicable? Their story remains an unverified, harrowing anecdote about the dangers that can lurk in the quietest places. What is a home, really? It's the one place on Earth where the doors are supposed to lock out the dangers of the world. But sometimes the real danger is already inside. Whether it's the sound of breathing from within a wall, a locked door holding a terrible secret, or a vacant property that is anything but empty, these experiences shatter our most fundamental sense of security. They leave us with an unsettling question. What would you do if you discovered the strange noises in your new home weren't a ghost, but a person? And which of those is truly more terrifying? The answer, perhaps, is that the most frightening thing of all is not knowing. It's the ambiguity that haunts us long after the story is over. If you have a story to share, I'd love to read about it in the comments below. And if you want to make sure you don't miss our next exploration into the dark and unknown, you know what to do. Thank you for listening.